Thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning with Debbie Roberts, who's going to be focusing on digital blended learning in the primary classroom, specifically focusing on maths and our TPK digital resource. If you have any questions, as always, please write them in the chat box and we will do our best to answer your questions. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar today. So we will be looking at the digital blended learning in the primary maths classroom. So let's have a look at the objectives for this morning, and thank you so much for giving up your very valuable time for us all to be together and share some good practice. So the objectives, the idea for this are that we want to maximise the digital resources in a blended learning classroom. We want to review and maybe learn or go over some of the strategies and techniques that actually support learning in a digital and blended learning environment. This might be an introduction to Max Maths Teacher Presentation Kit, which I will refer to as the TPK from now on. So this could be an introduction for some of you. It could be adding on to your foundation of knowledge that you've already got. Or it could be that we review your practice that you currently have using these resources. We will explore the TPK. I want to make sure that you are all familiar with what's actually available and how they can be used, how these resources can actually be used in the blended learning classroom. So that's the idea, that's what we're hoping to achieve during the next hour. Really importantly, I'm used to working in a room with you all, in a hotel somewhere nice, or some kind of nice venue where we work together and we share good practice. That's not possible at the moment, but this is the best that we can offer. And so I'm used to that interaction and the sharing of good practice and the sharing of experience and knowledge. So please use the chat box. If you've got any questions at all, I will endeavour to answer them. And I'm sure if I can't answer them, then Raina, who is supporting this webinar, will be able to answer them for you. If you've got any questions or any ideas, please feel free, use the chat box. You'll constantly see me going like that as I'm trying to read what you're typing away. And it's really important that we have that interaction. Otherwise, I'll just sit here talking to this screen all day, which is not very exciting really. So feel free to share any comments or anything at all using the chat box, and I will do my very best. And I really like that, if you've got any ideas or you want some support with something, please ask, and we'll do our very best to plan this into the sessions that we have coming ahead. So let's move on and look at the key points. There are many, many, many types of blended learning now, and they seem to be increasing and duplicating even more because blended learning is very topical at the moment and has been for the last year. Because I have some experience in computing and I've taught computer science and programming, I am moderately familiar with blended learning. I have been introduced to it over the years, but it suddenly became very, very, very topical a year ago for obvious reasons. And with that comes a lot of information. So when I first started researching and working in blended learning, I remember doing a Google search, and in one of the slides in a minute, I'll show you what I downloaded years ago and what I've used. And now when you look, it's changed completely. So I want to review that a little bit so that we're all very clear on what blended learning actually is. And then we'll look at how to use the resources that Macmillan have got for you using the Maths TPK. And I have to say, I don't get very excited very often, but I really do like these resources, and I'm not just sat here talking to you about them because it's my job. I actually would have loved to have used these resources when I was teaching full time. They are just amazing, and I told the story earlier on today where I could remember when I first started teaching and I was planning a lesson for the next day. and it was steadily approaching midnight, and I'd leave for school at sort of 7 o'clock the following morning. I remember sitting there and thinking, I wonder how many people around the globe are sat planning this lesson or have planned it in the last few hours. I wonder how many of us teachers have planned exactly the same lesson. And I remember thinking, how amazing would it be if we shared these lessons? We would cut our workload down massively. And I remember thinking that. And then when I'm doing things like this, it makes me think, but that's what we're doing with this, using these resources that have been developed by experts. They've been edited by an experienced team. They've been put together. They're perfect. They're as good as they possibly can ever be, and they're much better than what we could do for every lesson as teachers. So we should be using them, and I think the only reason that we're not is because um, we're not aware that they're available, and we're not aware of how to use them. So let's just review blended learning, and then we'll move on to the resources. So ultimately, all we need to remember about blended learning is it is a combination of traditional face-to-face classroom teaching and a digital curriculum. And that digital curriculum does rely on computers, and it's heavily dependent on the internet. Now, I know things have changed a lot, but when I first started teaching, I did like to use the internet, and I'll go into that in a minute. The reason that I like to use computers and the internet, I will develop that shortly. But I do remember having some really bad experiences where the internet went down, or 400 children in the school were all trying to log on at the same time and it crashed. And I remember in the early days having some really negative experiences because the kids would be sat there going, can't log on, can't log on, can't log on. And then the lesson would just end up in chaos, really. And I soon learned I either don't use the internet and computers, or I come up with a safety blanket. I come up with a backup plan. And what I generally did was I found that majority of time that we were using the internet, it was either to use internet resources or it was to use research. And so I came up with files really of research materials that could be used in case we couldn't log on or the internet wasn't working for a few minutes. I had files of resources that I'd printed out, which is not ideal, but just in that waiting period, so the students have got something to do, so you don't lose that lesson, that learning. So why should we be interested in blended learning? Well, over the last year, we've been in situations where we've been teaching and we've all of a sudden we were told to teach remotely, or we were told to come up with some kind of idea where we could continue delivering the curriculum, but not face to face. Now, my son is a teacher and he'd planned all his lessons in advance. And at 4 o'clock one Monday night, he was told all his lessons are planned up to half term. Very efficient young man. And he was told at 4 o'clock, as of tomorrow morning, you're teaching remotely. And he rang me up and said, how can I do this? I've never been trained. I've never been trained to teach in blended learning. How suddenly can I teach remotely? I've not had any training. I have no experience of it. And more people I talk to, that's happened so much. And people were just left with nothing. And so blended learning suddenly became very topical. There are strengths to using blended learning, and this young man in this picture shows me why we should be using blended learning, not just because of the pandemic, for always. I looked at some research just yesterday, and this research has been carried out by a consortium of business businesses, so it's not particularly educational. But what they've found is that people are using different resources in education. And they've found that through interviewing and researching and asking people, that we now as teachers in the educational environment have recognised that we are using strategies and techniques that we've never used before. But now we're getting used to them. We're beginning to realise that there are a lot of positives about them. And most teachers, but mostly managers in education, have reported that in some areas we won't go back. We won't go back to normal. We will continue using some of these strategies, though they've been painful and though they've been thrust upon us, they are quite positive. The young man in the picture sums it up for me. Young people are incredibly engaged with IT. They just seem to absorb the skills that are necessary. And as someone who's carried out a lot of research and worked in education, and I've got a master's in teaching and things like that, I think I can see the benefits of it, because students are enthused, they're engaged, they're curious, and using technology gives them instant answers. It gives them instant solutions. They are very IT proficient. I bought a smartphone. I read online instructions, manuals, and I still I was using my phone to do exactly the same as I've always used it. My 4-year-old godson picked it up, and within a few minutes, he was showing me things on that smartphone. He was telling me shortcuts. I've put this on for you, Aunt Debs. All you have to do now is click on this and it will do A, B, C, D. I knew children were good, but I didn't realise how quick they picked it up, and how they could process the information so quickly and so efficiently. We need to be using that. If children are engaged and interested, they apply themselves much, much more. And that application leads to a much deeper level of understanding. And it results in a deeper intellectual level. This means that they have processed the information. And because it's ordered, and because it's quick, and because they don't have to worry too much about spelling or getting things slightly wrong, as you would if you were writing it all down, because it's so quick and easy, they don't block up this short-term memory with instructions and confusion and problems. And so they process it very quickly, and it goes back into the long-term memory, which also means that their recall of information is much quicker and much more accurate. And so we should be using blended learning. We should be using blended learning all of the time, but it's particularly useful during this difficult period that we're in at the moment. So I'm not going to apologise for my enthusiasm during this hour's webinar. For people who've been to my webinars, you know I'm passionate about education. You know I am. And maths and science are really engaging and interesting to me, including computing as well, but particularly maths and science. And so you know that I'm enthusiastic. This session I'm enthusiastic more than most, because this is about blended learning. This is about getting students to be able to process and engage and have a deeper intellectual level of understanding. And it's also about making your life much, 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 much more efficient. You will be able to use these resources to deliver lessons that have taken you less time to plan, and they're more engaging for the children. On top of that, it is an ideal opportunity to deliver and to support the skills that are needed in inquiry-based learning. I'm an inquiry-based lead. I didn't give myself that title, other people did. I'm very proud that I have over 100 publications. I'm very proud of that fact. But I'm even more proud that all those publications, everything that I've ever worked on, is around inquiry-based learning. Why am I so passionate about inquiry-based learning? Because it's not about learning content, it's about developing skills. And these skills are not just used in maths, they're not just used in one particular subject area, they're used cross-curricular, and they are lifelong skills. I've bumped into some of my students as adults and they've thanked me and said, oh, you taught me these skills, and it actually has worked out, and it's beneficial. It helped me decide what degree to do. It helped me decide what kind of a house to buy, the life skills. And so if we can develop those alongside teaching the content, and teaching the content in such a way that the students learn it at a deeper intellectual level, and they can recall those facts much better, then as far as I'm concerned, we're in a win-win situation. So in a true blended learning lesson, students take responsibility for their learning. Learning is not done to them, it's done with them as part of a team. I have always said to my students, whether they're 3 or 4 years old or 70 something, I think my oldest student was, I've always said that it's your journey, it's your education. I've got my qualifications. I don't need to do it anymore. This is about you. You're responsible. These qualifications, this knowledge will support you. It won't support me. I want you to do well, but it really doesn't make any difference to me if you don't. That's up to you. If you don't want to learn, that's your lookout. But I've always said, as a teacher, I'm your guide. I will guide you through the curriculum. I'll tell you what you need to know to be successful, but it's your responsibility. A couple of weeks ago, a primary school teacher told me that this age group of children cannot take responsibility for their time management. They cannot manage their time effectively. Yet they know what time the favourite TV programme comes on TV. They know what time school finishes. They know what time lunch break is. So of course they can manage time. They might not know how long 1 minute is, but if we were all in a room now together, I would say close your eyes and put your hand up when 2 minutes have gone. And I can guarantee that majority of you would not get that right. And so we don't manage our time so very effectively either. As teachers, we live regimentally. I remember when I first finished teaching, I still used to have my lunch at the lunch break time that I had it at school. I still used to go, at the end of what would have been a teaching day, even though I'd got another 4 or 5 hours to go. So we are very programmed in teaching, I'll admit that. But none of us are particularly good at time management unless we practice it. So the objectives are shared and often developed with the student, and so the outcomes are improved significantly. The outcomes are improved because the children have got some ownership of it, because they've been involved in the planning of it. The results more flexible, and it means that the learning environment can be adapted, and it can be adapted immediately. Changes in daily routines and structures can adapt easily. Now that's music to our ears at the moment, because we're finding ourselves having to change and adapt and alter routines every day almost. And so this kind of teaching really does support the situation that we're in, but it really makes us think how valuable it is to be able to adapt easily. So the learning becomes accessible and personal. When we talk to students that are learning in this way, we're told, the feedback we get from them is that even though they might be in a classroom and there might be 20, 30 students, they feel like it's one-to-one. It's personal to them because they're involved in it. They take some control of it. The feedback also tells us that they feel more relaxed. They don't feel as stressed. I carried out some research with students looking at inquiry-based learning against traditional learning. And I thought that the higher achieving students would say that they enjoyed it and they were more successful. And I thought that the ones that were underachieving might feel pressure because they might think that they've got to achieve more and they've got to meet goals quicker. And actually the feedback was that they all felt more relaxed because they felt that it was their personal journey and they had some input into it, and it was agreed. They'd agreed something with their teacher. They'd agreed when they would complete something, for how they would present it and when they would present it. And so they felt that they were in more control. They were able to relax because they knew they'd got a plan. Now we know that when we look at mindfulness, that even as adults we're encouraged to write plans and we're encouraged to have tick lists, because for our mental well-being it makes us realize that we're achieving something and we're getting somewhere. And so for students to have this involvement, that means they feel the same. They're achieving something. They can see that they're achieving something. The world must look very complex to teenagers and students and young students and children. They must see that they've got all this to achieve. And yet, if we do it in small step by step by step, bite-sized pieces, we're actually able to take control of it. And it's bite size rather than huge. And so it's accessible and it's personal. Right, when I first started, this is the slide that I used. There were 12 types of blended learning, and I remember pulling them apart and thinking, is that actually outside in or inside out? Is that self-directed or is that mastery? There are some very, very fine lines between them. There are some very, very close borders and boundaries between them. And so the 12 types, these to me are the 12 types of blended learning, the important bits. So we've got outside in and inside out. Outside in, that's where the majority of the learning is done remotely. Notice I say remotely. A lot of times, if you look this up and do a Google search, you'll see that it says that outside in is working from home. That's not the case. Not every child. I'd love it if every child could access the internet and a computer at home, but I'm well aware that they can't. And so it actually means remote. And remote could be in the classroom, and they could be working on something completely remotely, completely separately to everyone else, but building on this agreement that they've got with their teacher. Or it could be inside out, and that could be where the majority's done it in and then it's supplemented. The supplemented bit I think is really, really useful, and it does really encourage that deeper intellectual level of thinking because it supplements. So this could be where we're starting, if we look at Bloom's taxonomy, where we're starting to synthesize the understanding that maybe they've got face to face from the teacher in that traditional background. They've got some understanding, some knowledge that's been given to them in the classroom, and then they supplement it. They take that understanding and that knowledge somewhere else that might not even be on the curriculum. It probably isn't, but it supplements that learning, it boosts it. And then we've got mastery when we get to a certain level and we want to actually challenge the thinking and take it to a much deeper level. And you can see that there's so many different kinds. Project-based learning. I actually love project-based learning, and whenever I write a resource or develop something new, I always try to include project-based learning somewhere because I really, really can see the benefits of using it. Students really enjoy it. It allows students Sometimes we give students a research task and you can see that they've found something that they're really fascinated by and they're really curious about it. And then when I'm observing lessons, sometimes I'll hear, but that's not what we're doing today. No, you don't need to learn that. Leave it. Well, the project base can actually develop that, because if you've got a student who's curious, then you're almost there, because they'll apply themselves then. It doesn't really matter what the content is. We as educators have to get our students through exams. It's as simple as that. But just look at it when you get to a higher level. You know, I'm sure you've all heard of David Beckham, the footballer. I worked at a university and somebody was studying for a PhD in David Beckham studies. It doesn't really matter what the content is. What matters is the skills. It's the skills and the application that really, really matter. And when we're preparing our children for this unknown, fast-paced, technological world, it really is the skills that will really benefit them the most in the future. And before you all start telling me, I know, we have to get through exams, we need content, but let's make it as fun as possible, shall we? Because if it's fun, they are children. If it's fun, they will learn more. When I did my search, about December time, I was starting to plan this session, and I thought, you know what? I wonder how many types of blended learning there are at the moment. I can't keep using this slide from when I first started that I've just showed you, the one with 12 types on. I can't just do that. So, you know, I wonder how many there are now. I wonder if they've changed. Oh my gosh, could not believe it. So I thought there were grey areas and there were overlaps. And actually, there are thousands now. So how them distinguish? How can they possibly distinguish between each type of blended learning when there's over 1,000? So my advice to you is, remember, blended learning is a combination of online learning and face-to-face. So that's all it is. It's just a synthesis of the two. Blended learning is face-to-face traditional teaching and whether it's supplemented, whether it's inside out, outside in, mastery, project-based, remote, ultimately, that's what it is. It is face-to-face traditional learning and online. That is it. Whatever, it could be 50-50, it could be 90% in the classroom. Recently, it's been 100% at home. It doesn't matter, so long as you've got that combination. We're mixing and combining instructional technology with actual tasks in order to create that harmonious, effective learning. Doesn't matter if it's reverse teaching, flip teaching, backwards classroom, reverse instruction, it really doesn't matter. As long as you're confident in designing lessons that are face-to-face at some stage, whether that be even an online and you're delivering a lesson and students are all sat learning online, that's still classed as traditional learning, really, because the blended learning, the computer-based learning, is more where students are independently working or working in teams, collaborating. So we're going to look at the Maths Teacher Presentation Kit, TPK. This is a digital resource. It includes lots of digital resources. We have the online student book, where the students can work through the student book, and it's actually a digital student book. And then there's the teacher presentation kit, which are resources for teachers. And that includes a very valuable resource, which for me is lesson plans. Okay, so you've got a lesson plan. And that lesson plan is linked to all of the resources, which I will go through because I am extremely enthusiastic and excited about these resources, because I think it's one of those things where as teachers we're so busy that we don't actually have time to research things in depth, which will actually save us time. That was always my experience. I never had time to actually find the things that were going to save me the time. So we're taking time out now. We've got an hour. When I'm delivering these sessions, one of the best things for me is to be able to say to you as teachers, right, just stop. Stop what you're doing and focus on yourself for a while. And that's what these sessions are about, really, because you don't have time to stop. If you were not doing this now, you would be doing something towards your teaching or sleeping, maybe. But anyway, so how can we use this TPK in the blended classroom and beyond? So when you look at your digital resources, this is the screen that you'll find. So you've got all the resources there. You've got the Max Maths student books for each year. And you've also got the teacher presentation kit. So that's your opening screen. So you would click on whatever year group you were teaching, and today we're doing maths. If you were doing science, you click on the maths, and then you've got all the resources there. So you get the digital book, which is beautiful and looks like this. So this is one of the opening pages to a unit, and this unit is numbers up to 10,000. So you've got all of the objectives listed for the students to look at for this unit. So hello Indonesia. I was there last year. I didn't realise I was there last November. If you saw me, very unlikely, but hey ho. Working, by the way. And so there are the objectives for the whole unit, so that students know what they're going to be learning. They know what they're up against. They know what the content is. So they're already starting to take ownership of this unit, because they're being introduced to you will learn this. We will learn this. This is what we are working towards. There's a nice picture there which inspires and enthuses. Can you see the graphics on there? Why is that important? You know, I think it was my dad said to me recently, well, when I went to school, we didn't have all this stuff and I did okay. Well, no, not really, because if we look at what maybe my father studied at school, yes, he was successful. But when I compare it, you know, sometimes when I'm writing courses, I might use my higher level stuff to start planning something. Everything's dropping down, the expectations are growing, and that's what we should do as a society. And so children are they're used to using, they're used to seeing high resolution. They're used to seeing perfection because they work on computers a lot. They're playing games on computers, and you know that's not all bad. But they're also researching things. If I said to students in a classroom, I don't know, what's a multiple of 15 or something, they would go, and they would get the phone out, or they'd get the laptop out, and they'd find an answer. We should be using that. They are skills. Just because we used to look it up in a book or get our exercise book out and look at what we learned in the lesson, there were skills we needed then. These are skills that are needed now. They're used to seeing pristine resources, and these are. So already the students are engaged and looking at it from a different aspect, because it's on a computer screen and it's interactive and it looks really good. Now, if you look on the top, my top right hand side, you'll see that there's a toolbar, and that toolbar has got some really, really useful icons. So the first one is an hourglass, so we'll look at that in a second. And then you move through, so where those dots are, the 9 dots, there are all the resources, got a nice drop down menu. Then you've got a toolbar, so you've got so many icons there that are all interactive. Also, if I keep thinking I've got the actual interactive screen open and I keep trying to click on things and that won't work, so I'll sit on my hands for a minute. But the arrow to the right, you can click through all of the pages. So this is the student book. Now, you can also use this from the teacher planning kit, presentation kit. You can see that you could put this on your interactive board, electronic board, whatever you've got in your classroom, and you could display this for the whole class. The first icon, the first tool that you can use there that's available is the timer. Now, as we said earlier on in the earlier slide, children need to be responsible for their own time management. How do we learn that? Well, we learn like we learn everything as humans. We experience it and we copy. That's how we learn. And so opportunities to use the timer help students and children to actually develop that skill in time management. They become very aware of how long 30 seconds is, 5 minutes, a minute. Whereas, like I said, if we all put our hand up now, not many of us would get that right. And if the ones that did, they would be counting. Well, if you're doing a task, you can't be counting and doing the task at the same time very effectively. So that's not really beneficial. So this time is great fun. You can set the children a challenge. Who can answer these questions in 5 minutes? Let's set the timer going. Some research does tell us, particularly in assessments though, not necessarily in games and interaction like this, that if in an assessment situation when you're told you have 30 minutes, people will look at what's left to be done, weigh up whether that's achievable in 30 minutes, and make a decision at that point to give up. So actually, it doesn't always help. A lot of students also tell us that when we constantly are given the time, you've got 10 minutes, you've got 5 minutes, you've got 3 minutes, it puts them under such immense pressure that they don't actually, they're so stressed and they're under so much pressure that they don't work effectively. It actually has the opposite effect of helping them to achieve the assessment outcome. The pen is highlighted in red there. So that's one of the tools on the toolbar. It's really useful because so the students can be using this in their, this is a student book, so they could be using this on their computer personally with a partner, in a team, in a group, or you could be displaying this on your interactive whiteboard. And we've got lots of little opportunities to check the maths understanding, to check how well they're doing, what progress are they making, how have they learned this section, is it a good time to move on, or do we need to review anything? The students could complete this themselves. They click on the pen and then you use it. You just drag the cursor to where you want to write and you write. So there's one that I've done using the pen, and it's just an opportunity to check, for them to check their understanding and for you to check their understanding. You could use this interactively on the board. You could ask for a volunteer to come up and use the pen. What I like about it is when I first started using electronic whiteboards or things like that, you had lots of different tools, and you'd go in a classroom or someone would use your classroom and you'd be like, where's everything gone? And people put it somewhere different, and it does affect your teaching negatively. And then we've got another opportunity to use the pen there on another Check Your Maths. I want to show you the different kinds of activities that are available at the end of lessons. So don't forget there's a lesson plan, and that will direct you to the different checkpoints and also any worksheets that support the learning. So the worksheets are really good for differentiation because they either support students who might be having difficulties, being challenged by that particular aspect of maths. When we're teaching maths, we often teach a little bit and then we move on and teach another little bit. For me, when I'm teaching maths in primary, it's like lots of little lessons in that big lesson. And so we need to check and we need to review more often than we would in some other subjects that I observe, where they'll teach a full lesson with one objective, whereas in maths we might have to teach lots of different objectives in little chunks, and so the checkpoints are really useful. Is it time to move on to the next bit, or do we need to spend more time on this? And if we do, we've got lots of worksheets, lots of resources that are all online. They're all digital, so we can use them. They're there and they're really quick and easy to click on and find. I keep thinking that we're interactive on this, we're not. The highlighter. Let's train our students to use highlighters. They're amazing tools. We all use them, but sometimes when I'm observing lessons, I'll look in someone's paper book or someone's electronic digital resource like this, and they've highlighted everything. And when we ask them why have you highlighted, what's it for, they can't remember. They cannot remember highlighting it, but they can't remember why. And so we have to train them that you highlight just specific points that either you want to review, you want to learn more about, or you want to remember, you think it's really important. And so they need to be very clear. So don't just accept that children know how to highlight or underline important information. We need to train them. I recently ran some revision sessions. I think I did one on here as a webinar. You might have attended it, and we were looking at, I asked in a big seminar with adults, how many people, who taught you to revise? And the majority of them said, no one. No one taught me how to revise. Well, we need to teach them. This is a part of reviewing and reflecting. We need to train them how to do it. So don't assume that they know. It's your job in primary to train these things. Okay, so the text box, that is really important as well. So that's an opportunity. So, you know, if you had a paper book, a workbook, you might write notes on it, or you'd write answers onto it. This, in effect, is the digital version of that. Students can put these notes, and it comes up in the margin at the side. So you click on the note maker. You can change the font size, the font color, the font type, and then you just type a note to yourself. Now, as a teacher, you can actually read these notes and you can see. So it could be a note between you. So if they're working remotely, they could leave a note on that page. You could pick that up and you could actually feed back to them. So it could be a request for help. It could be, am I right in thinking? And you can access that and you can interact with it, which is really useful. It's a very good way of collaborating. Even if the students are working remotely, they can collaborate with each other, but more importantly, they can collaborate with the teacher. And I think that makes them realize that they're not on their own. I'm not working on my own at home by myself. My teacher actually does care. Again, some research in primary, when we went into lockdown virtually worldwide last year, some of the younger children, the ones who had either just changed classes or started school, thought that their teachers had left them. The teacher didn't care about them. These kinds of collaboration and interaction must support those children who feel like that, and must make them realize that you are still there and you are communicating with them. So it's really useful for that also. It's not just about learning the content. This is the same page showing the maths problems, but this time it's a personal note. So this time it's a note for themselves. And I would imagine as children become more and more experienced with these digital resources, that they'll get more accustomed to doing that, because they're probably very used to writing things down in a book, and they'll soon begin to realise that this is in replacement maybe to writing in a book. That's up to you. It's your lesson. You work it the way that you want. But there's the resource if you wanted them to write things down, useful information, or just notes. It's a great skill after all. Now you can see that that's the drop down menu. So there's your resources, where that arrow on the menu, on the icon toolbar at the top, that's where your resources, your additional resources are. So you click on that and it gives you a list of all the resources that are linked to that lesson. Okay, so you'll notice at the top there's lots of worksheets. So I think for that particular one, that is an example of one of the resources, one of the worksheets. Now, the thing with this is, if we are working remotely, or even if we're just using home learning as an opportunity to work remotely, if we're using worksheets, you've got to print that worksheet out, and some way or another, that worksheet has to transfer from the teacher to the student. That means someone's got to travel, someone's got to journey, someone's got to pass. Now, we are not quite 100% certain how things are passed across, but if we can avoid handing things out, I think it's a bonus at the minute. This avoids it. There is absolutely no reason to print that out at all. Students can access that. They can use their pen to fill in the answers, and they can work with that. The best thing about it is they can scribble it out, they can delete it, and they can have another go. And that's the beauty of it. Now, below that, you can see that there's a blue circle with some headphones in it. Now, I don't know if you've noticed these as we've gone through the slides, but there's also headphones on the page. I worked in a school for students who were learning in English as an additional language. We didn't particularly focus on pronunciation. It was the least of our priorities at that time because there were young children or children that were new to the English language. And we know that there are lots of children that are learning in an additional language. We are happy that they will communicate in the additional language, because if they're verbalizing language, that leads to written language and reading. So that's good. That's where we want to be. But we do know from the research that if we don't start to correct pronunciation, there is a cut-off point where children can make progress, and it is much later. But if we can use pronunciation from an earlier stage without it blocking the learning of the initial content, then that's a bonus. Children like to click on icons. Click on that and it will speak the word or the phrase. Click on it again and it'll just continue doing it. Children think it's funny. I don't know why, but they're absorbing. And the more they listen and the more they hear, the more they will mimic it. And as humans, we learn from others and we learn from repetition. So this is a really good resource to support our students in developing that pronunciation, particularly in maths. There are some terminology in maths that you would not use anywhere else. And so it's a good opportunity for students to pick that correct pronunciation up. So that's another resource that's in that resource toolbar. I also love these. I learned early on that a lot of students have little confidence, and sometimes they won't produce the work that you've asked them to produce in a book because they're not confident, not because they're being difficult or they don't want to, work. They're just not very confident. And so I soon started using whiteboards. Students wrote their answers down, and if they were not confident, they used to rub it out. You knew it because they all had a black line down their hand there, and they'd rub it out. And no, I didn't do it. I haven't written that. And then they'd have another go until they became more and more and more confident. Then some students used to write on sticky notes, and if they were really confident, they'd stick the sticky note in the book so that, yes, I've done that. It's in my book now, so it's there to keep. For me, this is an upgrade of all those techniques that I used in the classroom to develop confidence. On here, this is an interactive activity. There are lots of these, and I absolutely love these. So students drag and drop information into the correct column in this particular got right, and it will say, would you like? If you remember using that technique where we used to write, have another go, look, cover, spell check, where they write a word and then they check it and cover it up, write it again, check it against the original spelling, and keep doing it until they got it right. And there's so much evidence that that worked and that children learn really effectively. This is the same thing. Ah, I've got one wrong. Delete it, do it again. Oh, we've got them all right. They can see the progress that they're making. This is an amazing resource. Students really, really enjoy it, and you can all come together. Even if you're working remotely, you can all come together over a call and work together on interactive activities like this as a group, collaborate and work together. So they're really good resources. The workbook pages are outstanding. They offer opportunities to practice. There are opportunities for that traditional kind of learning, or they can be used to supplement the learning that's either being carried out remotely or in that face-to-face situation. So these could be completed, and then children can get feedback from that, and you can decide whether it's time to move on to the next stage. There are lots of workbook pages. They're all like this. They're all digital, so they can be repeated and repeated. No photocopying costs, no danger of passing them around. The digital, online, students can work at their own pace on them. They can have a go at 2 or 3 of the ABC, have a break, go back, finish page 130, come back, do question 3, question 2. They can work at their own pace. And as they become more experienced and you become more experienced using these, they'll learn that they are working at their own pace, and they'll start to take control and responsibility for their own learning. This is an home learning opportunity. There is a lot of value in home learning opportunities. The value for the child is that they're learning in a different environment. So if you're asking them to find multiples of 10 on packaging, they're going to see more things at home because we use different things at home than we use at school. And so the learning environment is different. That's one thing. The children also need to become teachers. They need to know the content so well that they can actually explain the activity to the person that they're working with at home. Now, we always say as teacher trainers that we should know to the next level what we're teaching. So if we're teaching primary, we should really understand it to secondary level. So if a child is teaching it, they really need to understand this at a much deeper level. So it's a great opportunity. We've also got review and reflect using the smiley face, coloured smiley faces. Again, we don't review and reflect. Children definitely don't take time to review and reflect. It also gives it some value and importance, because the people at home have to sign it to agree and to approve that the child has actually been engaged in this activity. And then it's commented on by the teacher, so the teacher reviews that. So it gives that a lot of importance, this actual activity. Again, this is digital. This is a really good resource. We've got more opportunities to practice. This would be great on your big classroom interactive board. We've got another opportunity to practice. It's the same one, but actually this is from the journal, I think. Now this is the one that I think you should really play around with. So this is actually in continuous mode. So this is, if you imagine the red bit, the red border, that's what you would see on your big screen in the classroom. So this is what you'd use for your children learning. This is what they would see. So you can use the tools to fill in the missing bits, and students could come up and they could answer the questions. They could use the pen or whatever to volunteer and have a go. Or you could work through worked examples, which in maths is really valuable. And you've got so many different worksheets and opportunities to use that you don't have to start designing and planning them. You can work through them. There's so many examples that you could go over and over, because some students need that. They find it challenging. Some aspects they find very challenging. So the more opportunities you get to repeat it and go over it, the better that they'll learn it. Now this, I love this. You do not have to start writing PowerPoints. You do not have to start trying to find pictures, examples, samples. It is all here. And look at the graphics on that. Look at the pixels in those pictures. They are better than you could ever download and put onto a PowerPoint presentation. Apart from it looking amazing and the children can really engage with it, it's time saving. It will save you so much time. Now, the navigation bar at the bottom is amazing because you can actually expand, or you can move from page to page. You've also got access to all the tools there at the bottom, and you can have it on a continuous scroll. That is a very useful part of the TPK, and it's something that I wish I had when I was teaching, and I wish I could lay my hands on something like this for consulting, because it just looks so professional. It looks so good, and you've got everything you need there. You do not have to start looking for anything or changing anything. Again, another opportunity for review and reflect. This is a great opportunity for students to actually think about it. Is it time to move on, or is it time to make a little note to myself and review something or revisit something before I move on? Now, I've come to the end of that session. That is the quickest 1 hour I've ever spent, because we are just scraping the surface. My message to you is to go away, look at these resources and really, really, really explore them, because I really have just skimmed the top. But if you leave this session with nothing else, remember, you have got access to lesson plans, worksheets, and these online, this interactive board, electronic screen that you can display as part of your lesson. When I'm thinking about my lessons, everything else is a bonus. If you've got that presentation there, clear, up to date, you've got lots of worksheet opportunities, and you've got a lesson plan. What more? What more do you need? Just make sure you've got access to it. Right. Have you got any questions? Now, someone's asked me if I can share examples for each type of the blended learning. I can. How many do you want me to do? 12, 6, or 1,000? That's the thing. So on that slide, you've got some examples that will give you reassurance of what they mean, but it doesn't really matter. There's also, on the website, we did run a blended learning session, and I did look at individual types and gave lots of examples. So you've got access to that. If there's, if people want it, then we could maybe repeat that. I don't know. That's not my department, but I'd be happy to go over the blended learning again, because I do know that it is a big part of your teaching. And if I was in the classroom now, I'd be a bit overwhelmed by it, I must admit. But just remember, as long as you're doing some face-to-face traditional teaching and you're doing some online, that is blended learning. Don't get bogged down with all those thousands of examples on the internet. The resources are not endorsed by Cambridge, I don't believe, and they do support it. Yeah, you can use these to resource it. This hour passes a second. This hour passes a second. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. What a lovely compliment. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Is it Olga? Thank you. No, they're not endorsed. I didn't think they were endorsed, but they can be. You can use them, and especially if you're quite confident with the curriculum. Yeah. So no questions. If you do have any questions in the future, there are lots of ways of contacting us, and I'm more than happy to support you. as you know, people that know me. So thank you so much for taking your time to visit us today, and hopefully we'll be back to normal soon. Thank you so much, and thanks for your lovely compliments. That's makes my job enjoyable. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Debbie, as always. I think it's really important when you've got the engagement from the attendees to reflect the fact that blended learning can be used in multiple ways. A lot of teachers are still at home, unfortunately. So I think the techniques that you've really emphasized here could be great. And of course, our TPK, which is available for Max Maths Primary, which is our Maths Primary resource. And it's also available for Max Science Primary, which is our primary science resource. Debbie mentioned she delivered a blended learning webinar. We do have this available on our YouTube channel. So if you do go onto our Macmillan Education International Curriculum YouTube channel, you will see the most recent webinars there and have a look at that for reference. So just to say, as always, thank you so much to Debbie for her enthusiasm and her hard work on our webinars. We do really appreciate it. And of course, to our attendees for their engagement, because without that engagement, then I think Debbie would be talking to herself, and we don't want that at all. No. So stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you in an upcoming session soon. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.